So hey everyone, we're Eileen and Madhav. We are the co-founders of the Plastic Ships, and we just wanted to take a second to reflect back over the really amazing journey that we've had over this past summer. It's been a really great time of learning a lot. It's been a really great time of also failing a lot and then growing from our failures. But we think that because of all of these new experiences we've tried out and all of the lessons we've learned, we thought it would be nice to share some of that so that in case someone else was working on this in the future, or just for ourselves working on this in the future, that we wouldn't have to repeat the same mistakes, and we think it'll be a valuable conversation. But at the beginning, we won't dive into any of the details. We just wanted to summarize our quick takeaways. So we'll just do that, and then we're just going to talk about some of the details and share the stories there. But if you just want to listen to the quick insights, well, Eileen can start us off by sharing those.
Yeah, so to begin, at the start of the summer, we were mostly involved with content creation. So that was like our podcast, articles, etc. But we came across the realization that if we actually wanted to have a tangible impact with the plastic shift, then we couldn't be stuck with working on content for the entirety of the summer. Like we had to do something more. And that sort of led us to the realization that we wanted to work together with companies and organizations instead of just focusing on our own little thing. And it would be a lot more effective if we were to talk to these organizations to get them to improve their current approaches that they're taking to solving plastic pollution, or if we could help them with current projects that we're working on. And so that sort of led us to come across this new partnership that we formed with a company called Plastic Bank, which Madhav can elaborate on.
Mm-hmm. And this company connection really came about as a big lesson for us because it was very serendipitous. We were very lucky to be able to work with the Plastic Bank. It came about specifically from us doing outreach. We created some, when we were doing our initial research to just find out what the scope of this industry was. We came across their work. We were able to do more research on their particular programs and create an article on that, create a podcast on that. And because of that, because of being able to share that content with them, we were able to then later create a partnership. And that led to us creating more content like articles or podcasts, etc., for their online course that they will be launching later in the summer. And again, this was a lucky experience. It let us learn new things. But as the project started to reach its close, we were still thinking about how do we best make an impact? Because as we said earlier, content and awareness isn't necessarily impact. So then later on, we launched into a new initiative where we were trying to create more effective partnerships and still continue to work with companies, but try to share our ideas on what do we think are the most impactful areas of problem to work on. And that isn't always working on consumer advocacy or getting awareness about this problem. So when we started to do that, what we tried to do was we wanted to share these solutions to organizations by creating recommendations for them so that we could outline what would it take to launch an effective initiative like this. But the issue was that a lot of organizations were busy with COVID, and their priorities were to go about into emergency response and deal with the situation at hand with new restrictions like with travel, etc., than to start a new initiative, even if it is just laying the groundwork for one. So the consultation approach, where we would try to tell companies, well, these are some effective initiatives and ideas you could try in the future, that didn't really work. So that's where we went on to our next initiative, which Eileen can talk about.
Yeah, so once we realized that our recommendations weren't really proven to be effective, and now wasn't really the best time for us to be speaking to these companies about potential projects that they could work on, we came across the idea of doing something ourselves and creating our own initiative, like Madhav mentioned. And so we went back and looked at our initial manifesto that we created, which outlined all of these different aspects of plastic pollutions and sort of what we thought the most effective next steps would be with regards to each of these different subsections of the problem. And we looked into which area we thought we would be most suitable towards making an impact in. And after looking into these different areas, we came across specifically EPR as a potential path for us to go down. But we then, before we started anything like substantial in that area, we had a conversation with one of our mentors, and we realized that for us to actually make an impact and be successful, we needed to sort of think on a larger scale, and we were really narrow-mindedly looking at the problem at the moment. And so for us, that meant that rather than working on these sorts of small iterations and small projects that we had been focusing on for the majority of the summer, we needed to take a step back, sort of think about what would be the best approach to solving this problem, and think more long-term on what might scale and what might be successful. And so that's sort of the point where we are now. But it's definitely been quite a fun journey, and definitely a lot of realizations that happened along the way.
Mm-hmm. And the last thing that we would say is a quick takeaway for anyone else working on the issue is to not just think from the moment that is right now, looking at your existing skills, existing talents that you can use to solve this problem, but instead look at after you've actually done the research into the problem, what is actually required for it to be solved? What are the things that are most needed? And then work backwards from there to see how you can figure out the skills along the way that can help you achieve that goal. Because in the end, if you are able to work from where you're at right now with your existing skills and then work from there onwards, then you might have a chance of making a mediocre impact. But inevitably, if you're figuring out new skills, if you're training yourself to do something larger by working backwards, then maybe you might fail, but you definitely have a chance of making a larger impact, which is something that Eileen and I will definitely be considering going forwards. So those are the ends of our key takeaways. And from here, we'll be mainly talking about some of the stories of our experiences this past summer. And I wanted to start off by just asking, what do you think have been some of the best memories we've had during the past summer and the places where we thought that we were really growing?
In terms of best memories, I would say that I've enjoyed like just the entire journey so far. It's really hard to pick like a specific memory which I would like above everything else. But I do think at the beginning of the summer when things started to pick up, that was sort of like a really great moment for me, specifically after we had gone through the struggle of like trying to contact people and like thinking things weren't going to work out, especially given the number of reach outs that we did at the beginning of the summer. I was kind of skeptical as to how successful we'd actually be, because there was like one weekend where we sent a number of emails. I forgot how many, but it's just like kept reaching out to people. And I know personally I got a lot of rejections, so I was just like, oh no, this might not work. But things turned out for the better, and we actually ended up like one thing led to another, and we actually ended up getting to work with Plastic Bank, which at that moment I was like, wow, we can actually work on something. So I think that really enforced in my mind sort of that journey of like, sure, maybe things might not work out in the beginning, but if you keep like grinding and like putting work into it, then you might have something successful come out at the end. And also, like I was sort of doubting like our abilities at the beginning. Like this is not in like a negative way or anything, but it's just more in the sense where it's like, oh, we're just kids. We've only looked into this area for like a couple months. We haven't really spent as much time looking into this as like researchers or experts or whatever. So I was like, would people actually want to work with us? Like I wasn't really sure about the potential of anything coming out of it. So yeah, I would say probably the best memory was just going through that process and coming across the realization that, oh wow, we can actually do something.
And in retrospect, I found that, on the contrary, it wasn't like we had some major gap in knowledge that prevented us from doing things that other people didn't. It, in some cases, it actually felt like we were able to see more aspects of the problem from our recent experience with the most up-to-date research, whereas some of the people we were working with had been specializing in one aspect, but they might not know as much about others. But as we were able to connect with more and more people, that gap in knowledge kind of started to go down. I think a larger component of what might have prevented us from being successful was instead actually looking at the resources we had and the skills that we had versus the skills and the resources we needed to grow. And I think that area of growth wasn't necessarily like about us being kids or about us not having looked into the industry for a long time. I think it was more so about having the right experiences and then having the right, say, network or funding behind you, etc., etc.
Yeah, and I think part of that comes from just like if you have a lack of experience in the industry. I think that was sort of what I was getting at in terms of like us being kids. Um, I think also in general, like when you're put in a position where like other people in this industry have been working here for like so many years and they have experience in like business, they have experience in like marketing, etc., like all these different subsections. I think it was super insightful to go through the process of like specifically working with Plastic Bank. And like not only were we really looking at like the content creation side of things, but the chance that we did have to speak with the people there about sort of how they go about partnerships, how they go about more of the logistical side of things. um, I think those were like some of the most valuable conversations that we had. And throughout the entire summer, one of our goals was to sort of expand on that initial skill set which we had with regards to content creation. And so I do think, like, I agree with you 100% in the sense that, like, those skills may have been, like, if we were to have not been able to do anything, those skills may have been the reason why we weren't successful. Yeah.
Hmm. And then when we look at the other side of it, so the reasons why we might not have been successful, what do you think are some of the areas where we most blatantly like made misjudgments or were faced the largest problems in the past summer?
I think there was a sense of naivety which we had going into a lot of things. Um, I think maybe like one of our biggest failures was when we tried, like after our partnership, we were like, oh, let's go reach out to organizations and give them recommendation decks. And I think for us, specifically in those instances, um, I don't think we were thinking too far ahead. And also, we weren't thinking about this whole um, I don't know, this whole project from the mind of the people who would be sending the recommendations to. Like specifically, I remember when we got feedback from one of the organizations that we sent a recommendation deck to. They were talking about how they already have all of these plans that they've made for the rest of like 2020 going into 2021, and how they're already busy with COVID, etc. And I think from our end, we didn't really think about how they might have already had all these plans in place, and we didn't go in depth about like what are they currently working on right now, because we only limited ourselves to like what's available on the internet, what did we learn from the few conversations that we had, but we didn't really probe deeper into that. So maybe like giving a recommendation deck isn't the best way to help them, and we didn't consider that as a possibility in the first place. So I think we spent a lot of time that, like, I would consider it going to waste, but we did learn stuff from it. But we did spend a lot of extra time that we didn't need to working on this project, um, and it didn't end up being successful. So I do think there was a learning point there, and also made me think more about like once we start going into projects like this in the future, or if I ever want to like help a company or something like that, like thinking about it from the perspective of like who's working at that company, what are they currently doing, like how would they appreciate this sort of help, would be really important.
Hmm. I think another element there would be that it's not just about the time we spend on the project, so the time we spend creating the recommendation, but also just expecting the world to not work with us. One of the major things that our mentor told us when he was telling us about how just continuing on like this isn't a sustainable option in like working in these short-term sprints is the that results don't operate on your timeline. Results come whenever they come, and it's hard to make results come in a short. This is this is the week that we're gonna get this done, and this is the weeks we're gonna get something else done. I think one of the biggest holdups we had was in July when we spent 75% of it relying on this one company to get back to us, but they never did. But that's to be expected. They have bureaucracies and chains of command to go through. But we didn't plan for that as much as we planned for the timelines that we had for ourselves with how long we should do research for, how long we should design things for. And I think it goes to show that it it almost doesn't make sense to have finite goals at the beginning when we're just first starting to launch these projects. I think we should have focused more on what are we actually doing here? What is the actual problem? What is the actual solution? What steps do we need to take to get to that? But less on the deadlines. Although I think it's important to make us to maintain a sense of urgency. In our case, when we were often relying on other people, I think those timelines were more of a distraction when we could have focused more on getting the project up and running in a promising direction first of all, and then as we started to get into the flow of things, then focusing more on the timelines, etc.
Mhm. And also, like, when we were having that conversation with our mentor, like, when we started off everything in the summer, our goal was, like, by the end of August, we want to have made an impact. It was, like, first of all, very vague, but second of all, I think it was, like, unreasonable looking back in retrospect, and specifically, during that conversation with our mentor, he was talking about how we shouldn't necessarily spend our time, like, making our project match our deadlines, and instead our deadlines should be more flexible in that sense. I'm forgetting the exact wording, but if we are trying to make an impact, if we are trying to tackle this huge problem, we shouldn't necessarily restrict ourselves to like, okay, we need to do this in like 2 months, because that's really unreasonable from our end of things. And there's a lot of unpredictable aspects that might come into play. And at that point, you should more so just be working towards this long-term end goal and setting these shorter, like Madhav mentioned, these shorter sprints where it's like, okay, yeah, let's get something done by this month. Let's get something done by that month. Because at the end of the day, like those deadlines might mean nothing. And then at that point, you're like, oh no, I've been like scheduling these things, but then they aren't actually matching these schedules that I've implemented. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think the last area that we should talk about is in terms of the biggest surprises when it comes to where we exceeded our potential or had new learnings that we didn't expect. What were those for you this past summer?
Hmm. In terms of biggest surprises, I think I think it was just like, hmm, actually don't know. Difficult. Um, why don't you go ahead first and I'll think about it.
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest surprise was with all the support that we were able to receive from mentors. It came about when we realized we had to prioritize actual connections when we started sending updates like on a month-to-month basis, even after we might have finished interviewing one professor or another. And that kind of thing wasn't natural to me, definitely. I didn't expect it to be so important to maintain connections and uh, always keep on opening up opportunities and keep following up with people as I might have expected. But it showed me how valuable that was a few months in when every month it seemed like people were turning into mentors. It seemed like people were sharing opportunities. So opportunities to learn about new research, opportunities to learn about new companies, opportunities to just check in on a month to month and get advice on what's promising, what's coming on that we need to be thinking about, etc., etc. And it kind of happened naturally. It wasn't like a hi, I would like you to be my mentor and give me advice every month. It was just something that happened naturally as a consequence of sharing these things and articles, etc. And also just seeing all of the enthusiasm and support that people gave us because of, I guess, her newness to the industry. And just seeing that people who were very different, who were just starting out like we were working on this. I think as one of the professors I interviewed put it, it felt very fresh. So people were a lot more willing to help us than I might have expected.
Yeah. And along those lines, specifically with regards to like how professors and all these different people who like agreed to help us with our project, um, how much they actually supported us and how much they actually listened to what we had to say. Like I mentioned before, I wasn't sure if people would perceive our project as very naive or very like, oh, these are just kids working on something. Maybe their actual research itself might not be impressive or it might be very generic or something like that. And I think I didn't really give it ourselves enough credit for having like these unique insights that Madhav was mentioning previously. So I was just thinking, oh, like we won't get successful or we won't have like as much of an impact because people might not want to listen to us or no one's going to find our research interesting. So I think it was a really nice surprise to have other experts in the field who spent like years researching plastic pollution specifically say like, oh, like they actually agree with what we have and what we've come up with, and sort of getting that confirmation that like we were on the right track or that these experts agreed with what we had to say was a really great realization for me. And I think also just in general, like it's been really cool to just see how our skills have built up since the very beginning of the project. Specifically, like I have never worked on anything like this before, and sort of how we've been able to build upon those experiences and come up with something which is actually starting to make an impact. So just like that whole journey has been more of a surprise for me. Like I wouldn't have expected any of this to happen over the summer, as like generic as that might sound. Like that's genuinely, I did not expect anything like this to happen. So it's like a happy surprise.
Hmm. I think the best way to wrap up now would be to leave one or two key action items that either we should have, like, if we were to start over again, what would we do differently? Or if someone else were just to start working in this industry for the first time, what would what should be some things that they keep in mind? I think I'll give you a chance to think about it first. But on my end, I think one thing is definitely to look at the goal that needs to happen. What needs to happen instead of it would be nice if we did this, it would be fun to do that, etc. But just look at what needs to happen in order for the problem to be solved, and then work backwards from there to figure out if this is what needs to happen, then how can we make sure that it happens? What do we need to do to achieve that? Another thing that I would say is to very much leverage the people. The people are what make things happen. The people are the ones that say yes on the recommendation. The people are the ones who share insights on podcasts and allow us to learn more about areas of this research that are specialized. I even today I got an email from a professor I'd reached out to, I think a month and a half ago, but she just still got back to me, and it goes to show how a lot of people are oftentimes, one, just like very busy, but two, they're incredibly willing to help out and they open up opportunities that you really can't get yourself. Because if you think about it, there's always going to be someone doing something very interesting that is exactly the right match for you. but it's up to you to go out and find it. So for me, I think those are the two things. Be effective in what you choose to work on, and then make sure to leverage the people around you, including the people on your team, very well.
Yeah, for sure. And for me, I think another thing is to not limit yourself to what you think your current skill set is. When we approached like all these different projects that we had over the summer, we were like we drew a comparison between, oh, what are we currently capable of doing, and what do we not know how to do. And I think at the beginning of the summer, we only limited ourselves to work on projects within our own scope of like abilities, and we didn't really explore and like work on stuff which we hadn't really had as much experience with. So I think just like focus on not limiting yourself to, oh, I only know this, so I can only do projects within this realm, and being more open to learning new things, trying new things, and sort of expanding your skill set as it goes. So I don't think you should let that be a hindrance to deciding, oh, maybe I want to try something on my own. If you think that you don't have the right skill sets, then just go ahead and learn that. It's not going to be impossible. So I think that's really important. And then the second thing is, I guess this is more applicable to me. I don't know if Madhav ever felt this throughout the project, but just like not having like doubts about yourself and your abilities in terms of like what you are capable of doing. So I think just like don't underestimate yourself, or don't like say, oh, because I am a child, or because I've only been in this field for like a few months, it doesn't mean I can actually do something substantial. Because as I have learned throughout this process, that is the wrong mindset to take. So I actually proved myself wrong. But yeah, just having these two, keeping these two things in mind, um, definitely would be helpful if I were to create a project like this in the future, or if I were to tell myself back then to focus on something, I would definitely say these two things.
Hmm. And we hope that we can keep these lessons in mind going forward in the future with the projects that we decide to work on and the new initiatives that we decide to start. And hopefully for other people also that decide to work on this industry or just go about approaching a new industry where they're very unfamiliar and they don't have a lot of experience. Hopefully some of these stories can help provide insights into the best practices there, and also some of the solutions that are bound to come up, the problems that are bound to come up, and how to best get over them and still continue persevering at the end of the day. So that's it for us for this summer. It's been a very, very amazing time of just doing a lot more than we ever thought was possible, that we were capable of, or that was feasible. And this incredible adventure has been really, really, it's just been a really amazing time of discovery, both for ourselves, but also for what's out there in terms of others, and also for what this problem is like. So we're going to look forward to keeping on working on our next projects and do our best to keep on growing and leverage these lessons to not make the same mistakes in the future. And we hope that these kinds of insights can also be useful for other people who decide to work on this problem area or related ones in the future.